Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stoliarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, September 1st, 2024. Today, we have a fascinating conversation in store for you about progress in the field of cryonics, and particularly in supporting high-impact cryopreservation research. Joining us today is our distinguished panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers and members, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Legislative Director and current Vice Chairman, Jason Geringer, our Director of Community and Citizen Science and 2024 U.S. Vice Presidential candidate, Daniel Tweed, our member Alan Crowley of the Transhumanist Party of Texas, and our special guest for today is Kai Micah Mills. Kai Micah Mills is one of the co-founders of CryoDAO. CryoDAO is a decentralized community of scientists, entrepreneurs, funders, and advocates whose objective is to contribute to cryopreservation research projects that have a high potential to increase the quality and capabilities of cryopreservation. He is also a serial entrepreneur and an angel investor. He is the founder and CEO of Cryopets, an early-stage startup developing whole-body cryopreservation for animals. And indeed, we had an excellent virtual Enlightenment Salon with Kai on Cryopets on June 26th, 2022. Please watch that salon if you haven't already. Please also see the website of Cryopets and the personal website of Kai Micah Mills at kaimicahmills.com. But today, we are going to begin our discussion with a focus on CryoDAO. You can find the website of CryoDAO at cryodao.org. Please check it out. And with this introduction, Kai, please tell us more.
Thank you so much. It's good to be back. It's good to see a lot of you. I think most of you were actually here on my last salon, so I've at least met most of you. Jason, you look like me in 15 years. Looking good. Love the long hair. It's fantastic. So yeah, no, it's good to see everyone. And yeah, I'm happy to say a little bit about CryoDAO. We're still relatively new. You know, we kind of thought of the idea late 2022. You know, me and a couple of the other guys in the cryo space, as well as some of the guys in the crypto space. I had a crypto startup myself back in 2018. So you know, it's kind of like a merging of two fields that I'm pretty deeply involved in, and yeah, I think we really kicked things off in 2023, and then sort of at the end of that year, beginning of this year, we did our big raise, our big fundraise. So we can definitely jump into all of that. But yeah, I mean, we decided that there really needed to be a dedicated funder for more radical moonshot cryopreservation research, and that was really the main idea behind putting CryoDAO together. So,
yes, indeed. And if you could tell us a bit more about the current landscape of cryopreservation research, what you noticed was missing in terms of funding availability and for which kinds of projects, and what you would consider to be some high-impact, low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, yeah. Cryo was one of the. I mean, the main reason I got into cryopreservation in the first place. I mean, there were a lot of reasons, but and I might have discussed this last time, but I put together sort of a tech tree of sort of the broader life extension field. So I tried to map out what was going on in the aging field, what was going on in the cryo field, and then some other areas like you know, people working on like mind uploading and different things in AI, and tried to kind of map this out and figure out where I would be the most effective, like where my skills would contribute the most. And cryo was empty. There were like very few, if any, startups really. There's practically no like dedicated funders of this type of research. So it's there's so much low hanging fruit, and cryo is also like we know a lot of the problems that we're experiencing, right? There's not like a vast amount of unknowns, kind of like you see in the aging field, right? Like we know what the issues are that we have to solve, at least to get where we want to get to, at least most of them. So it kind of gave us an opportunity to to get a bunch of resources together, get a bunch of like-minded people together, and really go after this goal. And that's really kind of the magic behind DeSci, behind decentralized science. You're not going to get traditional funding for a lot of the research that we want to do. It's incredibly hard to get, like a government grant. It's still incredibly hard to get, VCs or individual investors to get behind this stuff. So for the research that we want to do, we wanted to be very flexible, and we basically wanted to get the money from people who just wanted to advance the research, people who were already sort of intrinsically motivated. I mean, that's one of the theories behind DeSci is like, for example, you could take like a rare disease, right? And you could get this community of all of these people that either have this rare disease or know someone that has this rare disease, or just care about eliminating it for whatever other reason, and they all kind of pool resources together and then sort of co-govern this treasury, and sort of put that money into the stuff that really matters. Because at the end of the day, for all these people that are motivated from those reasons, all they care about is actually solving the problem, right? At the end of the day, it's not financial returns, it's not anything else. It's that money is going to go to the most high impact areas. So there's so much low hanging fruit, not even just on the research end, even on even in just getting more attention to the cryopreservation field in general, and shedding light on all the like intermediate milestones as well, and the ways that this can completely transform health. I mean, there's so much to do here. But I will say, our focus is definitely, I would say, not low hanging fruit. To be fair, I think while there are those areas, and we will contribute to a lot of them. We even have it in our constitution that we founded it on, that at least 50% of the resources will go into like really moonshot research projects, which I guess are not low hanging fruit, right? So anyway, yeah, a little bit more of a background there. So
yes, indeed, and this is quite helpful. Now you have two projects that you are supporting already that have been announced on your website. One of them is spearheaded by a previous guest of ours, Ashwin DeWolf, whom we also saw present at the Global Cryonics Summit in Miami this July. And this pertains to high viscosity solutions to mitigate perfusion impairment. If you could perhaps tell us more about this project and what it aims to accomplish.
Yeah, so Ashwin's great, obviously, really excellent mind in the field. This project in specific is one that we crafted with him pretty early on. We wanted to have some projects out of the gate, so that we could kind of make our initial mark and get some money out the door, right? This one, he had some preliminary data that showed, that actually, and it kind of seems, almost counterintuitive, because you'd almost think, low viscosity solutions would be better. But he has some data that show that, when what it basically means, it's a lot of words, but for people who don't understand sort of what it means exactly, it's basically aimed at trying to increase the quality of cryopreservation that we get when there's a period of time where the body is basically suffering from a lack of blood flow, right? So there's a period of time where, you know, that body, that animal, whether it's an animal, a human, whatever, is not being cryopreserved just yet. It was basically aimed at trying to increase the quality outcome that we can get, even in those situations that aren't completely ideal and aren't like lab situations, sort of more field situations. This project in specific, we're actually working on, I don't know if upgrading is the right word, but because it will actually really be like a totally different direction. But we're working with Ashwin right now on sort of crafting a really, really large research project. When we had these first initial 2 projects, I think we had like maybe $200,000 in our treasury. Now we have, you know, well over 3 million to deploy. So we kind of decided, like, you know, $50,000 for something like this is a cool start, but we started kind of you know, planning out what like a flagship research project would look like. So I probably shouldn't say like the details, or you know, I probably shouldn't connect him with which project it is yet. We have talked about the project a little bit, but yeah, definitely really excited for that one. It's one that we're trying to move very quickly, because it's one of the projects that I think is going to bring it's a really important, I think, proof of concept, and one that'll really move things forward. So I'll just note that about that project is it'll likely be changed and upgraded to something much larger, ideally within the next month, I would think. So.
All right. Well, thank you for letting us know about that, and we will be on the lookout for what this project becomes. It seems that the $50,000 funding is just a start for Ashwin de Wolf, and we're very pleased that he's getting this kind of support. He was our guest on December 13th, 2020. Again, please watch that virtual Enlightenment Salon if you haven't done so yet. That was a conversation that we had for 3 hours and 47 minutes, and Ashwin is one of the most knowledgeable people in the world about cryonics and various approaches to cryopreservation and their advantages, disadvantages, the current state of the science. So I cannot think of a better person to receive the kind of support that you are providing him. So thank you for that. And the other project to which you have announced a $50,000 funding grant is this one, molecular profiling and computational modeling for novel cryoprotectants by Dr. João Pedro de Magalhães and Dr. Roman Bauer. If you could tell us a bit more about that project, I think that would interest our audience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this, João Pedro, I think he was the first person that I think actually just like the first account I ever followed on Twitter. I think he was actually the first one back in like 2013 or something. And he had, scientist planning to live forever in his bio. And I think he still has it there. So he caught my eye back then. So I was kind of a fan of his for a while. So first of all, it's super cool that we were able to, fund him with a little bit of money early on, and hopefully we can do more and have more projects with him. Emil from our side, one of the co-founders at CryoDAO, was also, I think, sort of at least like a minority kind of co-founder in Oxford Cryotechnology, which is the company that this project is sort of coming out of. And it's basically like applying, modern sort of drug discovery approaches to finding new leads and compounds for new cryoprotectants. So that's basically the goal of this project. And speaking of like upgrading or because like I said, now we have a larger treasury. We actually do have another project in the pipeline with kind of a similar approach. It's definitely a focus of ours is coming up with new cryoprotectants. So we have another one with a similar approach that we will be funding with probably a couple $100,000 and really kind of incubating and spinning out. So yeah, in general, this approach is a big one for us. And but yeah, it's definitely, it's applying like much more modern techniques at finding new cryoprotectants, because we do need to make cryoprotectants that are, you know, less toxic and work on larger organs and so on. So that's sort of the point of that project, and that's what, you know, those two scientists are working on over at Oxford Cryotechnology. So.
Yes, absolutely. Both of those goals are essential: reducing cryoprotectant toxicity and enabling cryoprotectants to work on larger organs. Alan Crowley writes in our YouTube chat that you have an impressive funding plan, and I'm curious to learn more about how CryoDAO obtains its funding, because you do seem to have a lot of funding right out of the gate, essentially, more so than most decentralized autonomous organizations that we have gotten into contact with. So that is an impressive start. And if you could perhaps share with us how you essentially obtain your funders, how you get these people connected with CryoDAO so that they believe in your mission and they're able to advance essentially your mutually shared goals.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, DeSci is such a new space. You know, in crypto, you've probably heard of like DeFi and some of these other areas. DeSci is very, very new. And by the way, crypto desperately needs it. I mean, crypto, everyone's always talking about what's the next use case for crypto and why can't we come up with anything that anyone actually wants to use? And, you know, and honestly, this cycle of crypto is I think worse than the last. I mean, it's just like, it's meme coins and nothing else. So I think, you know, crypto desperately needs to contribute to funding like human progress and scientific progress. So it's DeSci is a very, very needed space. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that. You know, so you know, even though you know, our treasury, we have 3 point something million right now. We're one of the largest treasuries in DeSci at the moment. And I'm hoping, you know, over time, well, I hope we always stay one of the largest treasuries, but I'm hoping, you know, the treasuries in general get bigger and more money comes into the space. And because there really is a lot of money in that space that could be, you know, directed towards things that are really, really good like this, right? So when we did the initial fundraise, we have a token, right? So it's the cryo token. And what it basically gives people is it gives them the ability to vote on a lot of things that the DAO does. You know, how the DAO behaves, what we fund. You know, we have working groups that sort of bring in deal flow and review them. And we have advisory boards, and we sort of present these projects, these sort of filtered projects, to our broader community of all these token holders, and then they can vote, right? So like every token represents a vote, and it sort of gives people the ability to not only contribute money to funding this research if they want to move it forward, but it also kind of gives them a voice in where that money goes after they contribute, and they can kind of stay involved and sort of help govern the DAO. That's really what makes it a DAO, right? So we started the fundraise last year, but we really pushed it kind of December, January, and and yeah, ended up getting just a lot of attention around it. You know, and when it's a project that I'm involved in, you're going to end up with a very strong narrative around it. I'm not someone that, I mean, if you know me from my writing, you know, I'm not someone who holds back with a lot of this stuff. And we didn't hold back with CryoDAO either with the narrative when we initially presented this. I mean, the fundraising page, the very first sentence was, CryoDAO's goal is to solve death, right? And I think in crypto, this plays especially well because I think it's just a community of people who are much more, I think, open to these kind of futuristic ideas, and so it's a community that really has a lot of overlap. I mean, Hal Finney, one of the first Bitcoin contributors, and maybe even Satoshi, right? That some people think he was cryopreserved, of course, and a lot of other sort of big crypto names are signed up to be cryopreserved, or at least interested in the field. I know Vitalik has made some donations to I think Alcor, and maybe a few other areas. So there's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of people who are interested in sort of more radical life extension technologies, including cryonics and crypto. So it really took off. I mean, we didn't have any really like paid advertising or anything for this. It was very organic, but just through X, we were able to spread the word for it, and people got really excited about the research and sort of the possibility of not only like whole body cryopreservation for life extension, but also for space travel, biostasis for long-term space travel, organ cryopreservation, of course, all these different areas that cryopreservation can impact. It really started to make waves, and yeah, I mean, within just a couple of weeks, we raised, I think it was about 3 million at the time, a little more now because Ethereum has gone up and gone down, and definitely it fluctuates, but it really set us up with a strong treasury, and I think we wouldn't have wanted to raise much less. I think you really do need like a pretty strong amount of money out the gate as a DAO, because you need to be able to fund at least a decent amount of research projects to kind of prove out the concept here, right? Why this even works. And so I think we really hit the nail on the head with the fundraise. I think it was a big moment for DeSci and absolutely for cryopreservation and cryonics. I mean, this is like completely unheard of, having millions of dollars, like basically crowdfunded to fund like really moonshot research. Yeah, it was definitely a cool moment. So
yes, the only fundraiser that I'm aware of that brought in more funding than that was the 2021 Pulse Chain airdrop that Aubrey de Grey coordinated with Richard Hart, and that money went to the SENS Research Foundation. Unfortunately, that whole fiasco afterward happened, and much of that money has not yet been accessible for the kind of cutting edge research that Aubrey would like to see happen. But some of it has been used for LEVF, the Longevity Escape Velocity Foundation, and the robust mouse rejuvenation study that's currently underway. But $3 million of decentralized fundraising is definitely one of the larger outcomes by far that I have seen. And Alan observes that before you entered the field, you noticed cryo was empty. He says cold and empty. Well, maybe a lot of other people felt that way as well. And when they saw that you were making an ambitious push to actually support a lot of that necessary research, they wanted to help out and contribute. And it also speaks to the importance of ambitious messaging, not being shy about one's goals, not essentially trying to tone down one's message for fear of offending people who might be on the fence, but essentially formulating a very clear and forthright vision that will hopefully be inspiring to potential supporters. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I've talked about this, like, really at least hyped about it in length, right? This is something that is very, it's on my mind often. In fact, like when I first entered the field in more of like a full-time capacity, maybe like 2021, around then, I spent like probably too much time just like arguing with people about this point, pretty much nonstop. I remember the first call I took with a buddy of mine who I just knew was in the field, and he introduced me to some guys, and including Aubrey. And I come from, what got me into the field is the Russians, right? Like the like Russian transhumanism, Russian cosmism, this kind of that sort of philosophy was what brought me into the field in the first place many years ago. And the Russians don't hold back with the messaging at all, right? Not even a little bit, which I always admired. I always really admired that. And one of the early project that got me hooked in the field was the 2045 initiative, right? And what we saw at the time was like a really radical way of messaging this. Literally the website was like, do you want to be immortal? Sign up here, right? Like it's, you really can't be more straightforward with the goal than that, right? And yet this project was, the amount of attention it got and the amount of support it got, and signups. I think even just through their website, they were able to get, I think 50 or 60,000 signups through their YouTube channel and their Facebook and all these. I mean, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of followers across all of them combined, which is really interesting. Because they didn't hold back with the messaging at all. I mean, this is complete proof that sort of messaging, when executed well, works. It really does work, and it's very powerful. I think there were still problems with the organization. I think the goals were not, sort of the milestones weren't what I would have made them. A lot of them were really out there. I probably would have kept it more biological. I wouldn't have said, let's throw the brain in a robot body or something. I probably would have kept it, biological, maybe focused on, whole body replacement and, some of these areas where it's probably a little more achievable by 2045, right? But I think there was really something to learn from that project. And these days, you see the complete opposite, right? And when I was entering the field, the reason I brought up that call, I kind of got off topic a little bit, but the reason I brought up that call that I joined with my buddy really early on is, after the call, he kind of pulled me to the side and he was like, by the way, you can't use those words. You can't say immortality. You can't say, just went down the list of the words that I use. And he was like, people aren't going to take you seriously, And it was so bizarre to me. It totally caught me off guard, because I was like, what are you talking about? This is the goal. This is why we're here. Do you want me to lie? Do you want me to, pretend? I mean, this just seems so insane, especially when I saw this example of something that used those words and worked, right? Proof that it works. And then, yeah, I mean, the field has, so going from that, 10 years ago to re-entering the field and seeing this total flip of how people were communicating this was completely insane. And, when this ties into the health span narrative and how a lot of this stuff has changed away from lifespan and away from living forever. And, which I've also complained about at length, because it's not just the narrative that changes. It's all of the focus. It's all of the science. It completely poisons. It really does poison. The goal. It poisons the ability to make progress towards what we actually want, right? And a lot of these companies that even claim to be in the aging space and claim to be longevity companies usually end up, just working on some specific disease anyway, or they end up pivoting into like an obesity drug or something. And when you don't have that strong goal, that strong mission behind it, it all crumbles. It all falls apart, right? It'll always end up being, it'll always end up really supporting death at the end of the day, rather than sort of fighting against it. And So this is something that I very much want to avoid, right? With the organizations that I put together, I think you really need to be careful, because especially in something like that's decentralized, like a DAO, you are going to get a lot of people that come in who don't agree with the initial vision there. It'll turn into, well, I don't agree in using this for whole bodies for cryonics, but I really want to push forward organ preservation, and that's why I'm here. And over time, this can really drive the mission away from what it originally was. So that's something that we try to put things in the Constitution and sort of set these rules in place to keep it mission driven. And then, of course, for something like Cryopets, where I'm essentially the dictator of, right? I'm the CEO. That will, of course, always be very, very on the radical side. I think on the website, for front page of the website, we have, Cryopets is solving the death problem, right? So, I think what we need to see is more organizations with the courage to use this wording, and I think we also need to see these organizations do well. I think when you start to see, if you see a startup using this kind of wording and it goes and it raises 20 million, 50 million, $100 million, suddenly everyone can do it, right? Suddenly everyone can use this wording, because now this is acceptable. And I think that's very difficult. It's very difficult to do. It's something that we are going to do at Cryopets, but it is difficult to do. You have to be extremely good at executing to sort of pull it off. And I'm hoping more organizations will start to follow. I hope organizations like Vitalism can and others can encourage companies to follow in those footsteps. But yeah, I mean, I could talk on this topic for a very long time, but I think yeah, my general view is that we really need to move away from these weak narratives and sort of pandering to to anyone that pandering to deathists, really pandering to people who support death and who think death is actually a good thing. We can't. We absolutely can't. We need to really draw a hard line on what we believe, and the progress will absolutely follow. It absolutely will.
Yes, thank you for those remarks, Kai, and I concur with you. Indeed, I would encourage people to check out the Vitalism website at vitalism.io that you mentioned. And furthermore, Alan Crowley makes a good point in our internal chat that this kind of watered down messaging is newspeak and or double speak if you use Orwellian terminology, and it retards the process of actually arriving at these advances. Alan also notes that incremental progress is the default position usually, but one can open the Overton window more expansively with ambitious language, and even people with more incremental goals or more incremental proposals are helped by this, because they don't have to justify their aspirations nearly as much if the pursuit of immortality or radical life extension is now seen as respectable, or at least within the pale of discourse. And it's interesting, too, to observe that within the transhumanist world, some of the most ambitious projects have been the ones that used more ambitious rhetoric. So the immortality bus, for example, was Zoltan Istvan's signature campaign vehicle, and it did very well, even though it was a 1978 converted RV with a lot of mechanical problems, leaking oil. It had to be patched up every few tens of miles, and yet it made it across the country to great acclaim, and it is still making a difference in terms of its influence on how the transhumanist movement is perceived. So that's another example of that kind of more ambitious messaging really working out. Now, Daniel, I know you have a lot of questions, so I'm wondering if you would be willing to ask one of them.
Oh yeah, it seems like part of the resistance to these kinds of indefinite longevity movements, like whole body cryonic suspension, we might be dealing with something I tentatively would call anticipatory survivor guilt. We know that people that survive when those around them don't have this experience of this phenomenon, survivor guilt. Would you think that's a legitimate thing to examine or talk about in the cryonics indefinite longevity space?
Yeah, no, I think for sure. I it's interesting. Whatever, it seems like a common thing that people bring up when you say something like living forever or however you want to word it. A lot of times they'll bring up like, why would I want to live forever and watch my family die and watch all my friends die and just be alone? And it's like, well, I'm not sure why you put yourself in a scenario where you're the only one that would receive this technology. You'd be very, that would be a very confusing outcome if only one person, you were the one to receive this. So I think that's just a weird, misunderstanding that contributes to that, right? And yeah, but it is a real point. I mean, a lot of people still do view cryonics as selfish as well. I've noticed, even not only with the aspect that you're talking about, but also, we should be dedicating resources to the next generation, and we shouldn't be using the energy required to keep us in these containers, right, and keep us in stasis. We shouldn't do that. It is a problem that contributes to sort of the lack of growth in this area, and it's something that we need to look into more. One of the main reasons that at Cryopets, at least, we're starting with pets is because that sort of selfish feeling completely goes out the window when it comes to people's pets. They no longer feel that sort of hesitation with it. It at least in our experience talking to pet owners and doing surveys and market research and all of this, is that as soon as the conversation is about pets instead of you, everyone's like, oh, absolutely, like I definitely want to cryopreserve my dog who is 9 now and who I wish could live forever. And they seem a lot more excited about and willing to say kind of the more radical stuff when it comes to their pets, right? They're like, absolutely, I want my dog to be immortal. Like, I mean, that's that would be incredible because it's a dog, right? I'm hoping we can also move that same excitement, move a lot more of it to humans too, because we are incredibly important, and we really should care about ourselves as much as we care about our dogs, right? But yeah, it's kind of, so that's kind of the hack that we've been taking at Cryopets to get around a lot of that stuff is starting with the pets, because it is more I guess palatable for people.
Maybe it indicates we need to get better at making new friends instead of relying on the old ones. Get in these affinity communities. Like people that speak Esperanto can stay at each other's houses when they travel. But yeah, I love the idea that you'd instantly be a member of this affinity group of other people that are longevity knots. Let's call them, perhaps. So thanks.
Right. Yeah.
Yes, and during my presentation at the Cryonics Summit, I actually had a slide about Cryopets that was entitled Pet Cryopreservation as Cultural Persuasion. Essentially, the exact point that you just made, Kai, that people may actually be more amenable, at least large numbers of people may be more amenable to cryopreserving their pets first, and that would essentially enable them to be more receptive to the idea of human cryopreservation going forward.
Yeah,
Now,
that's exactly the case. Yeah,
mhm.
or at least what we're seeing so far. Very much an experimental approach, but I think we need more of that. This was actually in Dan Held's talk at the Global Cryonics Summit. He was talking a little bit about marketing, cryonics from his perspective and seeing the rise of Bitcoin, right? Because you have kind of a similar thing where it's very kind of it's like taboo at the time. Everyone thinks if you're into Bitcoin, you're like a criminal or whatever else, and they definitely had a lot of hurdles to overcome, and still have hurdles to overcome. But there's obviously been a crazy amount of progress there. And in his talk, yeah, it's a great it's a great talk to watch. I actually lost my train of thought. There's a point inside that talk that I wanted to highlight specifically, and I think it'll come back to me. But yes, it's definitely one worth watching. It talks a lot about moving the Overton window in cryo, and I would definitely highly recommend it. So.
Yes, and fortunately, the Global Cryonics Summit has posted this talk on its YouTube channel. It is one of the 2 presentations from the Global Cryonics Summit that has been posted there. The channel is called Cryosphere Uploads, so please check it out, and hopefully more presentations, including Kai's presentation and my presentation, will be available there soon. But now Alan also has an interesting observation, and that is that rarely does he find people outside the transhumanist community that imagine the scenario where we all go there together. And that seems to him to be a kind of myopia, because how is it that somebody, especially a person of fairly ordinary means, somebody who is middle class, for instance, is going to be the sole recipient of radical life extension technologies? I don't imagine the possibility of a world where it would be just me or just anybody here having this conversation right now. I would find it extremely difficult to imagine it being just some billionaire either, because that billionaire has people who know him or her and who are working on this, and family members and friends and servants and people in their social circles. And even if it starts there, it's going to expand to encompass more and more people. So I don't see a scenario where it would be only for one individual and not for their family and friends and others in the society. But it's astonishing how many people have that response. It seems to be just a rationalization and not a serious concern if one really even takes a bit of time to think about it. Now, we also have an interesting question from Jason Geringer, and this is something you touched on briefly, Kai. Is there any research going on for short-term suspended animation? You mentioned space travel is a potential application. So what if there's a healthy person who's taking a journey to space and may want to take a nap for a year or 2 while the ship is in flight? Jason is wondering, is there any near-term research happening in that area? And if so, what would be the least invasive way for short-term biostasis? Of course, you don't want to do something like vitrification with that kind of individual. You want something as similar as possible to the pods and, say, the Lost in Space series, where you go in, you take a nice nap, and you come out, and it's non-invasive. Is there any way in which you think this could be achieved, maybe even, say, sooner than cryostasis revival for those who are legally dead?
Yeah, I would say as far as that being achieved, before people who are cryopreserved today being brought back, I think that'll absolutely be the case. I think it is an easier problem, right? I guess there's a lot of comments I could make on this. I think probably the most important one is that the really short term, stasis that we can put people in, which is sort of more like an induced coma, slower metabolism, would probably look closer to like the pods you see in the movie where they open up and some smoke comes out and the person walks out a couple seconds later, right? Obviously for that outcome you couldn't go down to super low temperatures, right? I think the problem here is it's a problem of focus that we do need to be careful with, because that technology, and to answer your question, Jason, there definitely is research going into that area, not a huge amount, but some. I think NASA even funded a project working on it, maybe back in like 2018 or something. But we need to be careful, because vitrification is what we want and need for what we want to accomplish, right? Bringing people down to those those higher temperatures and having them in that sort of stasis, I think for like a proof of concept, it could be cool. For inspiration, it could be cool. But the science is still much different than vitrification. And we do need to be careful about how many resources are going into the short-term stuff versus the stuff that can enable organ banks and indefinite storage and so on. Because even in the organ transplant field, there definitely are companies as well that work on sort of just bringing those organs down just a little bit in temperature, or to high sub-zero or just below zero, and sort of extending that window that those organs can be viable for by maybe hours or days, which by the way would make an incredible impact, right? But again, it's very different from vitrification. It's very different from long-term storage. So we need to be, I guess we need to be careful, because I think a dangerous outcome is that the entire scientific community sort of accepts the short-term stuff easier and ends up having all of the focus there, and then we're not actually getting any closer on like whole organism biostasis, right? Like the low temperature stuff that we want, so that we cannot die, right? Like that, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to. Everything needs to enable that in some way. So we've talked about this in length, because the space aspect is one that people do bring up a lot. A lot of people are interested in that. I guess what I would encourage us to do is to focus on really long-term space travel. Going to somewhere that's going to take 1 to 2 years. We don't need to put astronauts or the people on that rocket. We don't need to put them in stasis. 1 to 2 years, it's like bring some board games. It's not going to be completely necessary. But when you look at let's go to the nearest star that has an Earth-like planet, then we can get into some really cool conversations about really going down to these deep temperatures. Because if you're traveling 100 years, then the conversation changes. You definitely need to be at a temperature where biology is halted. Otherwise, you're going to age 100 years, right? So I think it's something that we do need to be strategic with when we are sort of partnering with the space field in all of this. We announced a little bit about it pretty briefly. We haven't said much about it. We just included it in like a slide on Twitter. But we basically, next year, we're hoping like maybe middle of next year. Nothing's confirmed yet, but we're trying to organize like a really big space cryo conference, where we would invite, people from NASA, from SpaceX. We would have astronauts there. We would have sort of this, really mainstream, cool kind of space event, and then the whole event would be kind of centered around asking the question, what would it take to sort of get us to one of these really far off planets or star systems or whatever, and that's sort of where this conversation would start around space plus cryo, and we would really try to focus that on the long-term stuff so that we can really move the conversation to vitrification, to really low temperature storage of bodies. And I think one of the other things that, focusing on this aspect, the space aspect of cryo, I think it can be powerful, is because a lot of mainstream scientists, even mainstream cryobiologists, can't talk about cryonics. Or at least they believe that they can't. But there's also there are tangible, downsides when you're in academia and you're representing your university, and you have kind of these rules around what you can be involved in and what you can say, and cryonics is still very taboo. So it causes a problem for them. So if we just had, for example, the Global Cryonics Summit, a lot of these mainstream cryobiologists who are working in other areas of cryobiology won't show up, and they didn't, right? Clearly they didn't. But if we move the conversation, we ask that question, how can we achieve this sort of really long distance space travel, with biostasis? It enables them to come and think about and talk about whole body cryopreservation, right? I mean, it's basically just a very strategic, almost trick to get a lot of the mainstream people to essentially talk about cryonics, right? So this is something that we are organizing. It'll probably be at one of the NASA campuses or something, and we're hoping next year. But hopefully before long we can sort of give more details on that and really explore the space plus cryospace more, because I think it really is almost completely untouched as of now.
Yes, that would be a fascinating conference to hold and to attend as well. So I'm hoping that you could make it happen. Now, in terms of, let's say, shorter term cryostasis possibilities, do you think there's a way in which they could also serve as a bridge in the public's understanding and appreciation of cryopreservation toward the longer term cryostasis that we would want to see achieved? For instance, Super Thin Guy writes in our comments, there's this person who froze to death and was brought back to life with heated blood, and this was essentially a demonstration that suspended animation is possible. There have been some emergency medical procedures that were performed with this premise, where essentially a trauma surgeon would be able to get a few hours of additional time operating on a patient, whereas if the suspended animation procedure were not used, he would have only a few minutes. And there is also, of course, the case for cryopreservation of organs. You mentioned the ability of that technique to render available a lot more organs for transplant. And indeed, I briefly interviewed Tanya Jones of Kinase Bio at Longevity Summit Dublin last year, and she did make that as kind of the focal point of the case for the cryopreservation method that she is working on, the helium persiflation, though I do know that she is a very dedicated cryonicist. She used to be the chief operating officer of Alcor at one point, so she does want this technology to enable whole body long-term human cryopreservation as well. But do you think these kinds of incremental applications could actually increase the public interest in cryonics and allow for a more favorable perception of whole body long-term human cryopreservation to emerge over time?
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, Tanya is great. I did watch that interview that you did with her. I've sort of had my eye on the persiflation stuff for a while. I think it's super promising. Maybe even we'll be able to fund some of it at some point if it makes sense. I know she already got some money from Aubrey, right? From his new foundation to start that up. But so yeah, I think absolutely. I will say we're not like completely against funding this type of research. I guess it was more of a question of focus. One of the projects actually, which has been sort of most exciting to a lot of us and sort of our larger funders at CryoDAO, is a project that we've at least nicknamed or codenamed Lazarus for now. And the goal with it is to basically, bring a small mammal down to high sub-zero. So this wouldn't be, all the way down to what we usually do in cryonics, right? It would be a higher temperature than that, but and then resuscitate, revive this mammal, and sort of display full functionality, right? I think the main question there is how low of a temperature can we get to? There were studies that were similar to this done back in maybe the 60s, and what there wasn't a ton of data on it. So it's something that we're basically going to try to do again, try to get to a lower temperature, and then have a really strong paper come out of it. And this is one that, so it's kind of like it definitely is like a proof of concept in a way. I think it's especially exciting because it's a mammal, right? As opposed to, I mean, there's obviously the wood frogs that can freeze in the winter and then thaw back out in spring. And there's people have seen examples of this, but I think it's much different when it's done in a mammal. I think people start to think, wow, this really is possible. And of course, the temperatures that we would go to for this are definitely lower than a lot of these examples of someone just like dying in a lake or something, and then being very cold and brought back. So it really would be a strong proof of concept. So yeah, not only do I think there are definitely applications and ways that can get people really excited and looking forward to this stuff, but we're probably like actively going to fund a pretty large project in that area. And yeah, as long as it's framed in the right way. Like would I fund much in like high sub-zero organ preservation? I'm honestly not sure. I'd have to think about it more. I would much rather focus on vitrification. But when it's a whole mammal, of course, if we try to do whole mammal, cryopreservation all the way down to liquid nitrogen temperatures and bring them back, we're just not going to be able to do it yet. There's more intermediate things that we have to do. But if we can get the successful result from this, I think it really would be powerful.
Yes, indeed. And I hope you do fund some of these projects. I appreciate the very nuanced answer that you provided. Now, Alan pointed out in terms of funding that the $50,000 grants that you've provided already are substantial for getting started. He notes grants work a lot like government funding in the military-industrial complex, and Alan is a 32-year veteran of the U.S. military, so he has some familiarity with that system. Now, he is wondering, will your organization CryoDAO create a Tier 2 grant for moving past prototyping and into developmental operations, especially if the initial $50,000 grant actually results in some quite promising findings?
Yeah, so I will just say, when we did these first two $50,000 projects early on, I think I mentioned we had a treasury of like $200,000. So it was more, it was less that's what we wanted to do, and it's just what we could do at the time. For the next, we have like 4 flagship projects that we're launching as soon as possible. And for one of them, it's I think it's 350,000. For another one we're looking at right now, it's 600,000. So the 50,000 is not our standard at all, and it won't be. We're actually much more interested in these larger projects, and we'll still make them, at least most of the time, milestone based. So maybe we'll do 200,000 at a time or something, and make sure that we're making progress in it, and then sort of keep continuing the project like that. But yeah, we're very much looking for larger projects. It seems like right now it's usually in the range of like 200 to 500,000 as an average of what we'll be funding, and I think we'll like to stick with that. This year, or I guess maybe not calendar year, but maybe more like from when we really got all the operations going. So maybe leading into like next April or next May, we'd like to fund, I think, 1.5 million total. So that'll probably be split between 4 or 5 different research projects, and then we'd like to keep that going. And then to as far as moving past prototyping into developmental operations, I mean, everyone at CryoDAO is we're all entrepreneurs, right? So we've all built a lot of companies. I'm sure you've talked with Emil Kenziora, who's built a lot of companies. Ellie from our side is also, he co-founded the Organ Preservation Alliance, and is a serial entrepreneur as well. So a lot of what we want to do at CryoDAO, and honestly what we're forced to do really, because it's vastly different than like something like VitaDAO, right? With VitaDAO, they get a lot of deal flow, they get a lot of inbound from researchers. Part of the problem there is because the aging field and longevity is so loosely defined that they end up just getting a lot of stuff that probably they shouldn't be funding anyway. But in the cryo field, we've got almost zero inbound deal flow, and part of that is because we know everyone. We know pretty much everyone in the field, so I guess it's less formal in the sense that they come to us and have a conversation about it, and we start to craft it, and it really puts us in a position where we're like incubating these projects from scratch, right? There really aren't projects that are just ready to go, and all we need is 500,000, and we've been trying to get it for 3 years or something. We really have to go to these scientists and say, like, we have funding now to work on the moonshot stuff. Like, let's come up with something. Let's set some guidelines for what we're looking for. And like, we've been just completely crafting the proposals from the ground up with the researchers. So a lot of that means, CryoDAO will have the ability to spin out any successful IP, anything that comes from these projects into startups, or find other ways to commercialize this stuff, which can also make it so CryoDAO gets money back to the treasury and sort of creates a flywheel of being able to fund more cryopreservation research. It's not the only way that we get money back into the treasury. Early on we did our initial token sale. We can also sell more tokens, right? Which we plan on doing sort of as soon as possible. We basically we'll do an OTC round where larger funders now will come and they want to buy $100,000 or $200,000 worth of the token. They can't really do it on the open market because there's a lot of slippage with the lower liquidity. They want to buy these larger amounts, and so that way we end up just sort of minting new tokens, and selling it to these larger funders directly. But that, plus being able to commercialize a lot of the research, I think sort of creates that that flywheel for CryoDAO, and hopefully we can get to the point where we're funding, tens of millions of dollars of cryo research every year. But yeah, to get back to the question, yeah, we're very much going for these sort of larger funding amounts, much larger than 50K, and definitely like working with them every step of the way to find ways to commercialize it, build a startup out of it, anything else. So.
Yes, indeed. So you do provide a lot of guidance to the leaders, the funding recipients of each project, and you are essentially there to assist them to ensure that the project becomes a success to a greater extent than just with the funding, but with expertise or essentially opportunities to expand the network and the reach of the person who is spearheading the project. And I think all of those are quite important. Now, we did have a virtual Enlightenment Salon almost a year ago with Eleanor Davies of VitaDAO. So those who are interested to learn more about VitaDAO's model for fundraising and determining how to fund scientific research projects in the longevity space, please watch that salon. And yes, it is indeed quite a different model from what you outlined for CryoDAO. As you pointed out, the longevity space as a whole is considerably larger than the cryonic space. A lot of different endeavors could be classified as longevity. And then the question is,
most of them shouldn't.
Hmm.
Most of them shouldn't.
Interesting. So you think a lot of them are perhaps too incremental, or they could increase some aspect of health in the short term, but not really increase lifespan?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's really, I feel like there's so many, I don't know the right word, almost like traps in that field where, there's projects or these focuses that feel like they make so much sense, and they feel like obviously we should be focusing on that, and one of the big ones, which seems, it really does seem weird to say, but is health. Health is not life extension. It's not. It's the absolute maximum amount of years that we can get out of in improving our health in even these more quote unquote radical ways, like Brian Johnson approaches to health. It doesn't matter if your sleep score is 100% and you're eating as much nutty pudding as you possibly can. We're still screwed. You're going to die. And honestly, you're not even going to get that many more years. It's going to be I don't think it's even worth the time, because we should probably be dedicating that time to like, let's say, building another company in the life extension space, like working on something really, like radical and moonshot that can actually maybe give us a chance of surviving. I actually don't even think it's worth the time, like on a personal level. I would say if you want to focus that much time on like that many hours on your health, I would say you should build a startup in the life extension field instead. I think there are very basic things that everyone should obviously do. You should be exercising, you should be working out, you should be eating a generally healthy diet. I think it's diet is tough because we still don't even have like an acceptable agreed upon diet where we can say, yes, this is the healthiest diet. I mean, if you look at like the food pyramid from even a couple of years ago that we were taught, it's like completely bizarre now, and the one 10 years from now will probably be much different. I think there's still so many unknowns. We still really can't measure aging. We can't define aging. So when it comes to the right amount of exercise or diet, or should we be eating more of this or less of this, or should we be it's incredibly difficult to say if any of this stuff is even working how we want it to work. right? I mean, we can take a biological age test and tell ourselves that is giving us any useful metric. It's probably not. I think it probably does a little more than provide entertainment value, because we really don't know what DNA methylation is telling us. I don't know. There's so much to like unpack here about like these different traps in this field, and I think you know it's dangerous because you know we have a lot of people focusing on you know on their what supplements they're taking and their diet and this routine and that routine, and you know, oh, my biological age is 32, so I've aged backwards, you know, 15 years, and clearly they haven't, right? they definitely have not. And I think a lot of these things really are traps, and I think I love the health field. I think it's fantastic. I would love to be more healthy. I want to feel good. I would love for people to keep working on these things. I want to have a perfect supplement routine. Like, all of this is so important. But I think we do need to recognize that it's not our field. It's not our field. It's a completely different field. It's general healthcare. It's general, you know, making us feel better and maybe getting a few more extra years, but it's never going to increase maximum lifespan. You know, we're not going to get past that 120. We really need to start focusing on these more radical things. And I think we have, you know, a big community of people now who are, you know, organizing around this idea of, let me just live as long as possible, and then, you know, maybe I can, you know, reach that longevity escape velocity. The other people will figure it out. And I guess from being inside the field, I can tell you these people are not going to figure it out without a significant amount, you know, of a significant amount of more help and assistance and money and startups and competition and people working on it. I mean, we are not at the point where we can just say, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to try to live as long as possible, and this is going to be solved. Because if you're one of those people that are saying that, you need to understand it's not going to be solved without you. Like, you need to be part of that actually happening. I mean, I just, yeah, it's another one of those topics I could talk about for a very long time, but I think as weird as it sounds, when it comes to true life extension, health is a distraction. And I think a lot of the stuff that ends up getting funded is actually just distracting from the mission. We need to be really careful about focusing on what's actually going to defeat death. But of course, I mean, this ties back to the conversation we had earlier, where when you change the narrative, you change the goals, you change the science, you change the focus, right? We've completely switched over to this health span narrative. We've completely switched over to, you know, this conversation that doesn't even use the word death anymore. It's just about, you know, the quality of years matters more than the amount of years, and you know, and it's okay if we die at some point, as long as it's, you know, at 100. If I can get to 100 to be healthy, then I'm fine dropping dead. And these conversations have definitely moved the science to funding, yeah, just this. I wouldn't even call it incremental, because I don't think it's actually making incremental progress on our goal. I think it's incremental for maybe human health in general, but not in defeating death. You know, the amount of organizations and companies and researchers that are actually working on defeating death is a scary low number, and we need to pump those numbers up. So ASAP, we need to pump those numbers up.
Indeed. And I agree that at the very least, extension of maximum lifespan should be an explicitly stated goal. And often it isn't, even among organizations that would be in favor of extending maximum lifespan, but they kind of try to bury that a little bit behind the health rhetoric. Mike Lazine says, sadly, he agrees with you. Life extension is not health, or health is not life extension. And John H. writes, in terms of health, moderation in all things is still the most rational choice. Most of the people he knows who made it to their late 80s or into their 90s observed no special diet or exercise regimen at all. He thinks DNA is God thus far. But he does say you have an excellent hat, Kai, and he has been one of our generous supporters for super chats, and today his contribution is, if nothing else, for the hat. But I think in order for us to be able to wear such hats beyond the age of 120, a lot needs to change fundamentally, not just in terms of healthy living. I think, as do you, healthy living has a place, particularly for those who might not make it to longevity escape velocity. Otherwise, getting them an extra 10 or 15 years would be quite important. But on the other hand, no amount of healthy living is going to get a person to age 150 today. And we would want to reach and substantially exceed that as well. Now, I also want to see if Art Ramon has a question or comment.
Yeah, as far as the moonshot ideas, are any of them sort of revolving around genetic modification of the organism? Say you've got your dog and you want to, ensure successful cryopreservation and resurrection, but testing genetic therapies on it, anything along that, is that being done?
Yeah, so I know George Church has talked about this a little bit. I think he even mentioned some ideas here at the Alcor conference a couple years ago. He did a talk there that sort of talked about exactly what you mentioned. There is a project that is in our pipeline. It's newer than the other projects. So there's not like an overwhelming amount that I can go into it yet. But it's actually, we were talking about, tardigrades a little bit before this started. And the project is actually looking at, using tardigrade proteins to actually strengthen the cells and tissues for vitrification. So actually ties in a little bit, with what we were mentioning before. So like I said, it's very early with that one. There's not a lot of detail I can go into, but yeah, it's definitely like an exploratory area that I would definitely be open to funding through CryoDAO. So maybe in a couple of months we'll have, if that one sort of makes it through the process, maybe we'll have one very similar. So
now, any other examples of a moonshot project that we haven't discussed already?
Yeah, so I guess, for our flagship ones, we sort of soft announced like just a few details of our 4 like upcoming main projects. The one I mentioned that we codenamed, Lazarus, is sort of that high sub-zero preservation of the mammal, and then reviving it, resuscitating it. Another one that actually just passed our voting process, so it's sort of probably like the most official one out of the 4 now, because it's definitely being funded, is it's a $350,000 project where we're essentially we are cryopreserving sheep ovaries, bringing them back, retransplanting them in the sheep, and then having live births from those like the sheep get pregnant, and there's actually going to be baby sheep from the cryopreserved ovaries, or previously cryopreserved ovaries. So this will be the first time that would have happened. I'm not sure I would I would categorize it as moonshot, because it's sort of taking some of these, at least somewhat proven approaches and just doing something new with them. It's going to be, nano-warming for bringing the actual sheep ovary back. So I'm not sure I'd consider that one moonshot, but it's definitely an outcome that will get people like really excited, and it's cool. I mean, you can think of, these ovaries as maybe being, the first organs that are available in like an organ bank, right? And how impactful this would be, and probably could very well be the first sort of the first opportunity to get through the FDA process with something like that, as opposed to like a large organ, which is going to be more difficult on the science side, or something that the FDA would just in general be less interested in. So I think there's a lot of like moonshot esque outcomes with it that I think are very cool. So that one's worth noting. Another one that we have coming up is actually two projects that we're taking a look at. Maybe we'll merge them. Maybe they'll be separate, but we're basically trying to get further on the like proving out memory, proving that memory is actually preserved through this process. So one of the projects that we're looking into funding right now is sort of training brain cells to do something. Probably since it's crypto, we might do something like training the brain cells to fly a rocket, like a very simple simulation, not like an actual rocket. And then cryopreserving them, bringing them back, sort of proving that memory has been retained. Because
and those are the brain organoids.
Yeah. So if you remember in 2016, I believe there was a kind of similar project with Natasha Vita-Moore and Greg Fay, where they proved that they could cryopreserve, C. elegans, have them come back, and they like remembered. I can't remember the exact. I think it was like they remembered to like avoid a certain chemical or something like that. So it proved memory, right, on a certain on a certain level, but of course it's much more simple. For this, I think we're still crafting the project. It's possible that we may do it in brain slices from a small mammal. It's still a little bit up in the air on the exact thing we'll be training, because we don't want, if it's going to fail, we would want it to be on the cryopreservation side and not in like, there's not like an established method to train, brain slices to do XYZ. So, maybe that would be the hiccup. We'd like to kind of avoid that. So, anyway, I guess it's still a little bit up in the air, but that's the general approach, is basically taking the previous memory project and kind of dialing it up and seeing if we can prove that memory is kept in sort of like the brain of a small mammal. So that one I would consider definitely on the moonshot side as well. And I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting any. There's more that are like earlier on that we can't talk about yet, but those were some of the sort of later ones. We're also working on another, like I mentioned, like a really new way to find cryoprotectants. But I probably wouldn't call that one like a moonshot either. But they're all very difficult. They're all, it's difficult science. None of this stuff is easy. They could probably all be categorized as moonshots in one way or another. But
okay, thank you.
Sure.
Yes, a lot of promising and intriguing possibilities for moonshot type research endeavors. Now, Alan Crowley has also been very generous in his support today. He says, one for the hat, now one for the chat, and we have a lively YouTube chat happening as well. He also points out that he wants both quantity and quality when it comes to longevity, and I think we all do. I think we would all really appreciate being chronologically 150 and biologically 25. I think that should be the goal. And distinguishing...
I do agree. I would say, I think what you're describing is absolutely best case scenario, and it's what we should aim for. But I think we should also recognize that if the only way to survive and stay alive is to be in maybe like a less ideal situation for a little bit, I would take that every single time, right? Like if the only way I'm going to survive is by doing a head transplant onto, you know, onto you know, Alan Crowley's, you know, the side of his head, and I got to sit there for 5 years until I can get my own body, then I'll take it. I will take it, because that means, you know, we're talking about, you know, we're talking about the prospect of immortality. I mean, you know, being in a less ideal situation for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I would take that deal every single time. And it may come down to that. That's what I would, hopefully not that, you know, scenario specifically, but it may come down to something where, it's less than ideal. I mean, if I had to choose, you know, one thing in the broader longevity space, which by the way needs a different name, but like maybe like the aging part of trying to tackle the death problem, replacement is, you know, the like what I would put my confidence in. I guess the little confidence that I have in me not having to get cryopreserved, I would put it into replacement. And by that I mean, you know, it may very well. I don't mean just replacing organs, which by the way we should be doing more of, and cryo is going to be an enabling technology for that. But I mean whole body replacement. You know, this is something that it sounds kind of intense and out there, but is actually, when you think about it, a lot more of a tangible approach than I would say any other that has been proposed in that space. From a very, you know, simple way of describing it is you would clone yourself and then do a head transplant onto the clone, you know, a brainless clone, so that you're not murdering your clone ideally, you know, and we wouldn't want to do that. But you know, I mean, we've done head transplants back in the 70s on primates. We've done cloning on primates. I mean, these things are extremely within our grasp, right? And you know, most of the times when this is discussed, it's also coupled with, like, you know, the Jean Hebert approach of, like, you know, brain tissue replacement. But even without, like, I would say Jean Hebert probably has the hardest part of this whole thing. I think the rest of it it's largely like surgical, right? Which is so much more approachable to me than a lot of other things. I think he probably has the trickiest part of this whole thing, that brain tissue replacement. But even without the brain tissue replacement, I think we can see like pretty significant lifespan extension, especially if you get lucky and you don't end up with, if you can sort of stave off or avoid dementia for longer. You know, with a new body, you could probably be looking at like many decades of lifespan extension from one procedure, right? From one surgery, right? So like it's that approach is extremely interesting to me. But I will say it's one of those approaches that, you know, is not that happy, we just take a pill and I feel amazing. You know, it probably includes, like, you know, like I said, your head being transplanted onto a new body. Your head is probably going to seem like older than the body for a while. Aesthetically, it's not ideal. We still have to fix, you know, the spinal cord reconnection. Maybe by that point it's already fixed. There's things like that even Elon is working on to bypass it completely. Maybe you know, there'll be more progress in repairing it, you know, biologically, so we won't have to bypass it. But maybe neither of those things work, and maybe you have to be a quadriplegic for a certain amount of time. I'm just saying these things might be the only way that we can survive with the very small amount of time that we have. And I would absolutely take that deal when the alternative is non-existence, which to me is just completely unacceptable. So.
Yes. Well, I have said before that life in any state is morally superior to death. from my perspective. So yes, in theory, I would pursue any approach that could extend lifespans. Now, I haven't quite gone as far as saying I would agree to be somebody's Siamese twin. I have said before, if to extend my lifespan, I would have to become some sort of floating dodecahedron. I would take that offer for at least some period of time. But we have had Jean Hébert on our virtual Enlightenment Salon as well, and he discussed his idea of incremental brain tissue replacement. So hypothetically, if one were to have a head transplant onto a headless clone of oneself, the brain would still need to be regenerated over time, and this incremental brain tissue replacement would come in to achieve that. But it would be a pretty invasive series of surgical procedures, actually, because you can't replace the entire brain at once. One would have to essentially replace it a few tissue slices at a time in order to maintain the continuity of the entire structure of the brain. But what is interesting is Jean Hébert may actually have the opportunity to implement his vision, because he was recently appointed as one of the project directors for ARPA-H. And this was quite a pleasant surprise, actually, that ARPA-H would be willing to have somebody among its staff who is that ambitious and that willing to test a very unconventional approach. So I think there is indeed some hope with that path. I do still want to hold out hope that most of us might not need to go there because of something like the SENS approach working out within the next decade and a half or 2 or 3 decades, if progress is a little bit slower. But if we could get more incremental rejuvenation therapies, perhaps we might not need a whole body transplant. But I do understand, say, for those who are 80 or 90 today, that might be a more proximate option. Generally, the older one is, the less time one has to wait for the, let's say, more gradual or less invasive approaches to manifest themselves.
Yeah, the way I see it is, I like preparing for the worst case scenario, right? Which is a lot of the reason that I'm in cryo, because cryo is that sort of, cryo only happens when really everything else has failed, right? Like, man, like a lot of stuff went wrong and now we're here. It's not at all like an ideal scenario. It's something that I would like to avoid completely. I don't want to be frozen in a tank. I mean, it's very much not ideal, but I like to prepare for the worst case scenario. And I think, unfortunately, in our case, the worst case scenario is probably the most likely one. Not even probably, I think clearly it's the most likely one, but we can definitely, hope that, and not just hope, but I think we can, put resources and a certain amount of time and attention into, trying to move these other things forward. I mean, like Jean Hébert, he's so far up on my list. I mean, I think he's just absolutely brilliant. He's really been one of my favorites for a long time. I remember him sort of briefly talking about the ARPA-H stuff. I think it was back when he had like his first talk with them or something at the first Vitalism conference. He mentioned it. So to kind of see that come to fruition now is super cool. Really can't imagine like a better person for that. And replacement, I think, has a big future as a field. I think so many aspects of it, but yeah, like especially with the brain and some of that kind of crazier stuff that I'm interested in, like working on advancing the head transplants and cloning and things like that. So many aspects to this, so many milestones that could impact other areas of science. I haven't mentioned it anywhere yet, so I guess I can mention it here. The CryoDAO model has worked extremely well so far. there's some imperfections, but as far as, pulling money together and funding like really crazy science, it has worked. It has worked at least to get off the ground. So I actually decided to just a couple months ago, still very early on, but I'm essentially forking CryoDAO and putting together a new organization called HydraDAO, where we're working on funding replacement research specifically. So I don't know exactly the timeline on when we'll do sort of the big fundraise for it initially and all of that. I think we'll also have to kind of time it with the market. It's kind of how you have to do it in crypto, but I'm hoping before long we'll be able to launch that and fund a lot of work in this area. I mean, there's so much to fund there. Everything from the like new ways to do organ transplants, all the way to the stuff that no one is funding and really no one is touching, which is the head transplants and cloning and that sort of whole process on the end. It's very similar to cryo. You have the organ preservation, and then you have the whole body and the cryonics and all that. And it's a very similar field, in replacement. You have the organ replacement, and then you have the whole body replacement, right? It's extremely similar. So so before long, we will announce that maybe more officially. Website's not even up, but for now I will drop a link for the Discord if anyone is interested in getting sort of involved in the very, very early stages of it. Of course, we decided to call it HydraDAO because the Greek monster where you cut off its head and it grows a new head. Among other reasons that the name works. So before long, hopefully we can start to move some of that research forward as well. I think that would be my current top bet for staying out of the doer and not being cryopreserved, but I do still think it has a lot of problems. So cryo will definitely stay my main focus, but hopefully we can start to move that field further as well.
Yes, thank you, Kai. This was quite fascinating, and I appreciate you announcing it on our virtual Enlightenment Salon. So anybody who is interested, go to the Discord server for HydraDAO, and I would definitely want to have you back as our guest when HydraDAO is further along in terms of getting set up, because that would be a fascinating salon-length discussion to have in and of itself. And I would say that entire field, of course, raises so many interesting questions, both technical questions as well as, to some extent, ethical questions. There was a bit of commentary about cloning in the YouTube chat, and I mentioned I don't have a problem with cloning as long as it's consensual. And then Mike Lazine raised the question of I-ness, and I don't think having a clone would enable the loss of I-ness of the individual who was cloned as long as the individual is still alive. But does that clone have any sort of sensations? And what happens if the head of the original individual is transplanted onto the clone? Essentially, I would hope the I-ness of the individual with the head would be preserved. Would the clone have an I-ness of its own to any extent?
Yeah. So to touch on this a bit, sort of the idea proposed here when it comes to the, I guess you can either call it a head transplant or a body transplant, depending on how you look at it. It's probably more of a body transplant because that I-ness, is what you're keeping. We can't do a whole brain transplant. We can't give you a new head because then you are gone, right? So that's kind of the point of keeping the head. I think in an ideal scenario, you would just transplant the brain. The problem is this is just harder surgically. Like I said, we've done head transplants and even as far back as the 70s, but like a brain specifically, there's a lot more connections there that you would have to reconnect. There's a lot more room for error, much more surgically complicated task that will probably have to be done by robots and not by surgeons, human surgeons at least. So that's one thing to note is in this procedure you wouldn't lose you, because you still have your head. It's your same brain, and that's why it's kind of coupled with Jean Hebert's approach of brain tissue replacement, replacing small amounts of that over time. But for the clone, you essentially, at least one way to approach this is by giving them. It's actually a condition that sometimes happens naturally. I believe it's called hydranencephaly, which also starts with Hydra. So another, I guess, good reason that we chose that name. But where essentially the brain doesn't form. So I think the brain stem forms, but the actual brain, the part that doesn't, that would make that body conscious and make it so that it's a person that can think, doesn't form at all. So that's kind of that would make it so you don't have to have a clone and then essentially kill that clone, like murder this other version of you that is like living and thinking and all of that, because that would clearly raise a lot of ethical concerns. And also, I mean, I wouldn't want to kill my clone. I'd probably want to recruit him or be friends with him or something. I wouldn't have any motivation to do that. So that's kind of how you get around that problem is you basically create a brainless clone, you grow it to the desired size, and then you do the head transplant. And that way, there's no like real living being there that you're discarding or anything. You're not killing anyone. It's just a spare body. And I think we should have spare bodies for a lot of reasons. I would love to, have a body sitting around with a new heart or a new, some other organ that I need, or anything else, any other transplant. I mean, I think cloning is like, we do need to get past this weird energy around cloning and just realize that there probably is a lot of really exciting things, even just for health, that we can enable through cloning. So yeah, that's kind of the idea. You're not killing the clone, and you're not losing who you are. Because I agree. I mean, I have the same reservations when it comes to certain types of preservation in the cryo field. Aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation and a lot of these preservation techniques that are kind of aimed more for mind uploading or being able to like scan the brain later. I have yet to be convinced of these, because I think there really is that really pressing clone problem that is maybe more philosophical than anything. But I also think it's a largely unanswered question. I think it's difficult to have any kind of confidence around that. I think we need to, again, preparing for, I guess, worst case scenario, we need to keep that I-ness unless we have definitive proof that that it doesn't actually mean anything, and like our clone would be exactly us, which right now we don't have. So.
Yes, absolutely. I think the preservation of I-ness is extremely important, and I'm skeptical of the aldehyde stabilized cryopreservation for that reason, even though technically it's a very interesting approach. We had an extensive discussion about this in our virtual Enlightenment Salon with Kenneth Hayworth and Robert McIntyre. So those who are interested in delving into this in greater depth, please watch that salon. Now, we do have a question that is more specifically related to CryoDAO from Josh Hobka, who states that somebody in a Cryosphere Zoom asked what would make investors want to donate to CryoDAO if they cannot write it off. And I think he means for tax purposes. And Kai, would you agree that mission alignment would be the purpose for donating? That is, a lot of people might not even care about tax write-offs when they donate. Like for me, it's not even a consideration because I take the standard deduction anyway. But even for those who would itemize their deductions, they may think the goal is just worth that contribution, even if it doesn't favorably impact their tax returns.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I guess I will note as well. It is a good point, and maybe like under the CryoDAO umbrella, maybe we can have some sort of organization that that would enable that better, so that those people can sort of make that donation, and if that's like a requirement for them, so I think that's something to think about. But yeah, I think crypto is definitely its own world. And people have their own motivations, and there's a lot of different reasons that someone might want to own a token or a cryptocurrency, right? And I won't get into all of them here, but it definitely is different than just like wiring a donation, because you are getting a lot of that access, that ability, that governance power. You are getting the token in return, so it's not like you're not getting anything in return, right? So it's I think that's that, and then yeah, of course your point of mission alignment is, I think, probably just the most important. But yeah, something to think about there. If there are people that want to do a sort of tax deductible donation, maybe CryoDAO should have some sort of sub organization, and we're like actively expanding it. I mean, there's CryoDAO is it's a DAO, but you still have to have like legal structures in place to exist in the world, right? You have to exist, right? So as of right now, it's a Swiss association. But we will likely expand that to more entities as we go, especially when we're like funding different types of projects. We're actually looking at spinning up different entities right now, so that we're like able to put money in those projects. And so maybe another one that we can spin up would be something that enables that better. So it's a good idea. It's something to think about.
Yes, indeed. And perhaps something will come out of this for those investors or donors who care about the tax consequences. Now, we have a lot of interesting comments about the head transplant idea. John H. writes, you grow a clone without its own brain and spinal cord and maybe eyes, the only normally visible part of the brain. Then you install the person's brain into that genetically compatible clone. Easy peasy, right? I think he's alluding to the technical challenges of that cultivation and then the head transplant procedure. Mike Lazine wonders, how would it work with attaching the head to the body and with its central nervous system? Wouldn't that be complicated? And he thinks robots would probably be necessary to do this, that human surgeons wouldn't be precise enough. John H. wonders whether we would actually need to grow a whole new body to have spare parts, or if we could just grow hearts, livers, kidneys, anything we might need as it ages, and just replace organs incrementally. So I know we have about 6 minutes left in our salon. If you could talk briefly about incremental organ replacement as a possible solution, including, of course, Jean-Hébert's brain replacement if one pursues that route, as contrasted with growing a whole new body.
Yeah, no, they're great points. One of the things I'll note is that when the first head transplant was done on the monkey back in I believe it was 1970, Robert White. He wasn't certainly wasn't a robot. It was just him. I believe he actually practiced on bodies at the morgue before doing this on the monkey. A very, very talented surgeon, and was able to do the head transplant successfully, right? Now, of course, like I mentioned before, there's still the spinal cord reconnection. This was not a solved problem. I think the body also rejected the head after 11 days. Of course, this wouldn't happen with a clone. But in this case, the body did reject the head, and then so I believe the monkey lived about 11 days. But still, I mean, there was a lot about that process that was successful. So that's just worth noting on like the difficulty of it. I think you know, one of you said easy peasy as kind of a joke, but I think that's actually true. I think when we look at a lot of these approaches to like really defeating death, a surgical procedure actually is easy peasy compared to a lot of these. I mean, that is so approachable. It's like an engineering problem. So I would, even if it was tongue in cheek, I agree. It actually is easy peasy. I would put it in that category. And as far as incremental stuff, you know, I think the only problem there is, I mean, eventually you're going to need all of these replaced, every organ, you know, and not just organs. I mean, you have to think about, and a lot of times this isn't even thought about in the broader longevity field. Like maybe if we have like a SENS approach to repairing things, you know, what happens when our joints start to break down? What happens when a lot of our bones start to break down? A lot of these, I think there's more than just our organs. There's more than just even the fleshy bits of us, right? We'll probably need a lot of replacements. So I think it's probably more of a question of, you know, is it easier to go in and get 20 different surgeries to replace your heart and your kidneys and your thymus and I mean, who knows? I mean, just so many different things that are going to need to be replaced inevitably. Or is it easier to just go in and pop your head over on another body and sort of have like a one and done approach, or at least something that is much less drawn out, you know? And I mean, how many transplants can you really get before you're so sick and tired of getting another transplant? So I think you are right though. Like I don't think we need to grow whole bodies to have spare parts. There's so many different approaches to this right now. Which one is going to be done first? I'm not sure. But like I said, I mean, we can clone primates right now. If ethics and sort of any red tape was out of the way, I think just growing clones of ourselves would be a much faster process. But you're probably right that the spare parts just individually will come first, probably from red tape made by humans more than anything scientific. So.
Very interesting, and this has been quite a fascinating conversation. All the more reason to have you back on as a guest once HydraDAO is further along. Mike Lazine says Kai is making really good points, and John H. writes, yes, reconnecting the nerves is the hardest part. I don't think they're very successful at that at all yet. Now, Alan, in the last minute or so, you have an announcement to make that's relevant to cryonics. So please go ahead.
Muted here. Let's see.
Yeah, I've unmuted you.
Thanks. Yeah, earlier, Kai, you mentioned creating a CryoCon kind of thing, having a big conference for that, and directing it towards space travel. There's already a group, the National Space Society. Every year they have a very large conference, a couple thousand people show up, and it's for the ISDC, the International Space Development Conference. Usually somebody speaks about cryo, you know, or some sort of long-term solution for getting from here to Proxima B. And it might be easier than creating an entire conference on your own to get a track, you know, to have a cryopreservation track and through the 3-day weekend and let people tune into that. You could get a variety of speakers together. You'd need to do that for a conference anyway. So it might be an interesting way to get started on a project like that.
Amazing. No, I appreciate it. I'll take this link down and we'll look into doing that. I mean, even if we do the space cryo conference, I think we should also do that. If if we can. So amazing. Yeah, I'll definitely take a look. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I was a little surprised you hadn't, because it's such a strong tie-in.
Yeah, 100%.
Absolutely. And this is just one example of some of the great connections and opportunities that can be discovered through our virtual enlightenment salons. So thank you very much, Kai, for joining us for a second salon with you as our guest of honor. As always, we greatly enjoy exploring the possibilities for overcoming death with you, and let's make it happen sooner rather than later so that we can all live long and prosper.
Absolutely.